Hi, I'm Graham Craig. I've been asked to tell you how I got involved with silver fluoride. Well, it started over 40 years ago in the early to mid 1970s. I just finished my PhD on metal fluorides. And at the time, I was interested in a number of metal fluorides, basically because of the metal moiety, which when you used these preparations on carious lesions, and I mean carious lesions that had reached dentine, I was interested in the metal moiety primarily because of its antimicrobial activities and the ability to bind to proteins and bacteria that one finds in certainly the superficial layer of carious dentine. I had a look at iron fluoride, zinc fluoride, copper fluoride, stannous fluoride and silver fluoride. I had to eliminate iron fluoride, I had to eliminate zinc fluoride. Their antimicrobial activity wasn't all that great. Copper fluoride, terrific, but the problem with copper fluoride was its low solubility. So I was left basically with stannous fluoride and silver fluoride. I became attracted to silver fluoride for a number of reasons. It was a very powerful antimicrobial agent. It had a long history of use in medicine and in dentistry. Well, if one goes back really before recorded history, people that kept their water in silver containers found it stayed purer longer than if kept in earthenware containers. So silver, and also in the First World War, silver plate was used to restore skull defects in wounded soldiers. So it had a very, very good history of safety. So I became interested in it. And then, strangely enough, as things happened, I was sent a bottle of a bottle that looked like like a blue bullet with all Japanese writing on it, and someone said, "Oh, this is being used in Japan for treating carious lesions." Anyhow, I found out that it was actually it was saccharide. It was silver diamine fluoride. Anyhow, I thought, well, this is interesting. I didn't think too much more about it. I put it to one side. And then I was asked at one stage by a colleague, would I look after his young son? And the young son had a very bad history with dentistry, and to put it politely, he was a very difficult patient. But the situation was that this young son had 4 hyperplastic 6-year-old molars. Now, the orthodontist looking after him wanted these teeth kept till the appropriate time when they could be extracted and to allow the 12-year-old molars to come into the space. So I was faced with the situation of what to do with these hyperplastic 6-year-old molars. And this young lad was really needle phobic, and I thought, oh gosh, what can we do here? Then I thought, well, look, I've got this silver fluoride here. I'll treat that. I'll put some silver fluoride on, and I left it there on the lesions. I isolated the teeth, put the silver fluoride on the lesions, followed up the silver fluoride fortuitously by a reducing agent, which was stannous fluoride, and covered it with what is called we called in those days a stoma-adhesive wafer. This was a wafer used for colostomy and ileostomy use, where to stick bags to the skin. It was had sodium carboxymethylcellulose, gelatin, and pectin, and a plastic layer on the top. Anyhow, what I did, I just after I treated the tooth, I just draped this over it. It dissolved in oral fluids, no real problem. As often happens with a lot of patients, when they're under orthodontic treatment, they forget to go to their general practitioner, or they forget to go to their regular dentist. And actually, I lost track of Jason for that's the young lad's name, for a number of years. And some 2.5 years later, I was walking up the stairs of our dental school, and there I see Jason walking up the stairs. He was going to the orthodontist, and I stopped him. I said, "Oh, Jason, how are you? How are those teeth going? Because I haven't seen you back." Anyhow, I propped him up against the wall of the stairs and had a look in. I thought, "My God, what am I seeing here?" So I asked him to come down to my surgery on a lower floor, put him in the chair, turn the light on, and these lesions these hyperplastic lesions that were soft all those years ago had become absolutely rock hard. I thought to myself, wow, what is happening here? Insert slide. I said, what the heck is happening here? I said, this is truly amazing. And as luck would have it, a colleague who was principal dental officer of a very large geographic area west of Sydney, it was actually about 8 hours drive from Sydney, called me up. And he said, "Graham," he said, "I've got a real problem out in it was a town called Burke. I've got a real problem." He said, my staff out there are threatening to go on strike. They are absolutely sick and tired of being bitten, kicked, scratched by uncooperative patients. And I said, "Oh, this is interesting." He said, "Would you please come out and have a look?" And I said, "Oh, okay, I will." So he bought an airline ticket for me, and I flew out to Burke, and I had a look at these children. I didn't select them. They were, the various operatives had selected them for me. I had a look at these kids, and I'd worked out that their big aversion to dentistry was, they were all needle phobic. And this stemmed back to their earlier life where they'd been given injections and vaccinations, etc. And if you'd heard them talking about injections, instead of something being given out of a 30-gauge needle, one would think it was being delivered through a drain pipe. They really had needle phobia. So I took all that on board and went back to Sydney and spoke to my colleague Keith Powell about it. I said, "Keith, we've got a bit of a problem out there, and the principal dental officer wants us to do something. Do you think this silver fluoride might be useful? In light of what I'd seen with young Jason." And we thought, "Oh, well, we'll give it a try." And look, we had no guidelines. No, we had absolutely nothing. It was a bit like being thrown behind enemy lines with only a handgun. We couldn't use pre-medication. We couldn't use general anaesthesia. We just had to wing it, basically. Anyhow, so we went out there with our equipment, and I had to make up some silver fluoride because I had a background in chemistry. I was able to do it. But just as an interesting sideline, in those days you made silver fluoride by putting hydrofluoric acid on silver oxide in a Teflon container and heating it up. And I thought, I just don't like the thought of heating up hydrofluoric acid. So I moved all the equipment outside under a tree. And anyhow, I duly prepared the silver fluoride. And a couple of days later, I actually went back. I'd left something there. I went back to the spot, and I looked up at the tree, and all the leaves had been burnt for about a height of about 15 to 20 feet. That's how dangerous that's how dangerous hydrofluoric acid is. Anyhow, they don't do it that way these days. But anyhow, that was just an aside. But anyhow, with the silver fluoride that I prepared, we went out to Burke and started treating the open carious lesions. So they were basically in primary molars, thank goodness. We started treating the open carious lesions in primary molars. There was a couple of things that we were able to do which it proved to be extremely valuable. Firstly, we were able to take bite wing radiographs and photographs. Now, for some reason, the bite wings were taken on film, but the beauty of what we found with bite wing radiographs is that the clinical depth of a lesion corresponds very, very closely to the radiographic depth, and this is probably due to the thinness of enamel. It doesn't occur in permanent teeth, but in primary teeth, as I say, the clinical depth is very, very close to the radiographic depth. So we used guidelines if there was a layer of about 0.5 millimetre of radiographically sound dentine between the base of the lesion and the pulp, you could use the silver fluoride approach. The other thing that we had to do is, because these children were needle phobic, we had to remove certain items that could have provoked fear. And this is where photo 1 comes in. We had to not use injections. We had to not use items that looked like injections. We actually had to remove items that smelt. We knew we could not use matrix bands on primary teeth. How often has one had a situation where one has prepared a cavity in a primary, say a occlusal proximal lesion in a primary molar, and only have problems when the matrix band was put on? The ginger around primary molar teeth can be extraordinarily sensitive, so no matrix band. So that pushed us towards the use of later on, further down the track, of glass ionomer cement. The other thing is that we had to dress casually. You couldn't look too clinical. We had to have a casual look. Anyhow, we started to treat the children with silver fluoride, isolate the site, apply silver fluoride, leave it there for 1 to 3 minutes, put on the stannous fluoride, and put on a stone adhesive wafer that I described earlier. Okay, that was the initial treatment. Incidentally, the silver fluoride that I'd prepared, because of the sensitivity to smell of these kids, I made it a water-based material. I prepared it without ammonia. Now, I have been able to stabilise water-based materials, but that's another story for another day. But it was water-based, so there was no smell. So we finished our after the initial treatment. We made sure that we inspected every patient a few days later to make sure the carious lesions had gone black, and if they had, that was it. No other problems. Fine. We came back to Sydney, and then we returned 6 months later, had a look. If any lesions had shown signs of lightening, we retreated them with the silver fluoride, stannous fluoride. Actually, and we subsequently showed in another study, the retention of the black colour was a very, very, very good indicator, a very reliable indicator of whether the lesion was progressing or not. So if it was black, you're on a very sure bet that the lesion hadn't progressed. So we did that 6 months later, 12 months later, 18 months later, all chemical treatments. The interesting thing was, by the time we went there for that 18th-month visit, there'd been a complete change in these kids. They almost ran to greet us. I just couldn't believe it. We had turned tigers into lambs. It was truly amazing. So then we were able to move into stage 2, which we only did for political reasons, and I'll explain why. Because of the lesions had gone black, we were concerned that some of these children might move outside the area and be seen by other dentists that wouldn't understand what was going on. And they'd see a black carious lesion and they'd either decide to fill it or extract the tooth. So for political reasons, we started covering the black areas with glass ionomer cement. We used hand excavation, and the glass ionomer cements that we used at the time were pretty primitive. One was Asper 4, I still remember it. It was made by Detray, I think. And the other one was from GC Fuji 2. But for political reasons, we started covering them all. Hand excavation worked quite well on most lesions, except the distal lesions on upper and lower first primary molars. The distal, we used to call it the distal of D's. The distal surface where the marginal ridge had broken down to try and get retention with a proximal box was not all that successful. Anyhow, the point is that that's what we did at that particular stage. This was way down the track. Now, then we kept going back. Well, actually, we kept going back for 6 years. But what we found that we were then able, from the hand excavation stage, if required, and this was for the distal, those lesions on the distal of upper and lower first primary molars, that we needed to do something more to increase the retention, the retention rate. And we thought, okay, we'll use very slow speed burrs and slow speed handpiece, sharp tungsten carbide burrs, going, the speed that you get in a slow speed handpiece. Now, this was another discovery in this isolated town. They used to get line surges in the power. And the power, obviously the voltage had dropped way down at times. And I remember treating this young patient. I even remember his name. I won't mention it, but I can still remember his name. And I was doing a prep on a distal of an upper left first primary molar. I can remember the tooth. And we got one of these drops in power, and the burr started to slow down. And this kid started to relax in the chair. I thought, what the heck's going on here? And I said to Keith, I told my colleague what had happened. And we worked out that children, or in terms of discomfort, their primary teeth can take pressure, but not vibration. So what we did, we then went with subsequent cavity preparations. We used reduction handpieces. I think it was 7-to-1, 8-to-1 reduction handpieces with sharp, or number 3, number 4 round burrs, and we were able to produce cavity preparations like we show here. So, in summary, we kept going back to Burke for 6 years. The technique, I talked about it at various dental conventions, and the technique started to become quite popular. As I say, we learnt a lot about the primary dentition. We learnt that they have their own set of rules. They have their own set of rules. In terms of pain in the primary dentition, we found pain was invariably pain from food impaction or pain from a tooth about to exfoliate. We found also with food impaction, as long as one had a contact area somewhere above the gingival margin, this is completely in contrast to the permanent teeth, there was no problem with food impaction. If there's a contact area just somewhere above the gingival margin, no problem with food impaction. We found that root stumps, I mean, in days gone past, we would have been there with our elevators taking out root stumps. Root stumps turned out to be very, very good space maintainers. My colleague Keith Powell did his master's degree, ortho master's degree, on the orthodontic sequelae from the approach we adopted. Anyhow, briefly, that's how I got involved in silver fluoride. As I say, my chemistry background, I've kept an interest in it. I've used my chemistry background to make a couple of inventions. I was behind the concept of, for example, Riva Star, where silver fluoride was followed by potassium iodide. It was never designed for open carious lesions. It was designed to be used on permanent teeth where some residual caries was left, vital permanent teeth where some residual caries was left, and one wished to leave it there. One would use the silver fluoride or diamine silver fluoride potassium iodide combination, put on a glass ionomer cement base, and then restore the tooth. Yes, I was behind the original concept there. I gave it to Jeff Knight to do his PhD with, and then subsequently the Jeff Knight, myself and he and took out an application patent on it. There's another invention in the pipeline which I'm very happy about, but that will, once the patent is released on that, well, I can say more about that. Thank you very much.